Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for being here. Thanks for staying. As for those, sometimes we get here a little bit later and we go earlier, as many have left, but sometimes you get to stay to the end. I think it's been good today because it's something that you had said earlier. The chairman brought it up, and I just was one from Northeast Georgia. It's good to, be back. I know you traveled to Gainesville and Judge Kelly's court and everybody else up there for a while. But I think the interesting thing here is something that was said earlier, especially about when asking for stuff, and it was the determination. I'm not going to share that here. And I think the question is, I would just have a general question to start with. What is your belief, personal belief, and how much you have to cooperate with this committee?
My own view is that we should be trying to do everything to cooperate with this committee that we legally and appropriately can.
Okay. And because you come here, you're under oath, you're still under oath. It's something we take very seriously, but I've also been here 5 years. And some of the questions today, and I want to put in perspective because there's some things I just want to put for the record as we have a good relationship starting forward, because I think you bring a great breath of fresh air, hopefully, to this agency, as I believe. My dad was a state trooper. I come from a law enforcement background. We've got to have this trust. But just as a few years ago, right before I got here, in July 6th of 2011, in a draft letter that was circulated within the Department of Justice, a department official, Faith Burton, wrote, "I'd stay away from the representation that will fully cooperate in the future." This was in dealing with Fast and Furious. So you've got to understand the members up here doing our constitutional job are sometimes skeptical of what has been said here. And I've had an interesting back and forth with the former Attorney General, with your former, the former FBI Director. So I just have a few questions, if we could. One, is it possibly, and recently there's been some problems, and I want to hear from you, of unprecedented leak of information about FISA wiretaps. We got into FISA a little bit ago. Specifically, there was a leak of information related to the FISA wiretap of Paul Manafort. Leaking information about FISA warrants is a felony, is it not?
I'm sorry, leaking information about FISA warrants?
FISA warrants is a felony, is it not?
Yes, I would think it would be.
What is the FBI currently doing to identify the leakers of that information?
Well, I'm not going to comment on or confirm or deny the existence of any specific investigation. I will say that when we have at the moment quite a number of active investigations into unauthorized disclosures of classified information.
Is it something you would say that you would put a high priority on? Finding out who leaks and holding them accountable?
I believe that finding out, I will say that I believe that finding out who has leaked classified information is something that's extremely important. I will say also, having been somebody who has had responsibility for a lot of leak investigations, not just now, but when I was the Assistant Attorney General and had both Criminal Division and what's now the National Security Division, leak investigations are breathtakingly difficult to pursue.
Well, I think
and so that does not mean we shouldn't pursue them. And in fact, I am a big believer in the idea that we should, even if we may be pessimistic about our ability ultimately to be able to find somebody charged, because the mere fact of conducting those investigations sends a strong signal that we will not tolerate people leaking classified information.
And I agree with that, and I think that needs to happen, because it's got to start with you, and if it doesn't start with you, and I think, frankly, there's not been that leadership in that department for a while. Well, let's go back to FISA, because earlier on there was a discussion that it came across as we're not going to provide that or provide that in this setting, or we didn't have a right to that. So I just have a few questions. So what information or documents related to FISA do you think the FBI can withhold from the committee? Can they withhold FISA warrants?
Well, I think there's a couple different stages of cooperation here, right? So one is the question of what we can provide in an open setting, and then one is what we can provide, right?
Because I want to get down, because your time is valuable, mine. We'll just assume it's in the proper setting, proper format. But what I was concerned about was the way it was actually said earlier was there may be some issues. So if properly asked for a FISA warrant, is there any reason why you would withhold that information legally that you can?
There are situations where information related to a FISA application involves sensitive sources and methods that, in my experience, are not shared with committees of Congress.
Okay, information that has formed the basis for FISA warrant, or legal memorandum regarding FBI's interpretation of FISA.
Well, the FBI's legal interpretation of FISA, unless it's asking for attorney-client privilege information, I would think something we could discuss with the committee.
Again, I think that's the concern that I have. And looking at this is, as the chairman said earlier, and backing up the chairman, the jurisdiction of this committee on both sides. This has become one of the biggest issues that we have here. And I've been here on different committees asking different agencies under a Republican administration now and a Democrat administration, is there's a belief that you can withhold from this oversight. And this is the primary, especially on FISA, is the primary. So I'll clear up the uncertainty you might have. The committee has the authority to demand any document or piece of information related to the FISA program. And there are many things that we would like to see and be a part of, and I think you've indicated your willingness to do that. We need to continue that openness in this thing. Otherwise, you're going to continue to have the discussions and innuendo and everything else, because at the end of the day, this is a problem. But my last question has one concern. You made a mention earlier, and I thought it was sort of interesting. You said that Mr. Strzok was not demoted or trying. I'm not sure, frankly, and this is just a good North Georgia boy looking at this. How do you take the #2 counterintelligence person who is on one of the highest profile in special investigative committees that's been in a long time in this town, and take him and put him in a random slot at Human Resources? Not offensive to Human Resources. They got a big job, but I don't think there was a pressing need for your #2 person here in counterintelligence, who was on the highest profile investigation going on this Hill, to all of a sudden say, you know, there's a big need in Human Resources. Let's move him over here. I have a bigger concern that if it's some of the issues that have fallen out with Mr. Strunk, why would you put him in Human Resources where he would have a oversight or even teaching responsibilities of what other agents would be a part of? I think you need to be careful, maybe just from an example part, of how we say that that wasn't a demotion or a transfer or something that did not have proper, at least on the appearance of what happened in this case. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.